Episode 6 Duels.
Kurt.
Blaine jogged his elbow with his. He was sitting next to him at the central area of Kurt's room. Kurt only mumbled a faint reply of acknowledgement from where he was trying to copy down some text into his notebook.
Kurt, come on. Are you still mad at me? You haven't spoken to me since yesterday.
Kurt just tusked in annoyance as he pushed off Blaine's hand from his notes, trying to focus.
Is this because I told Wes and David and the others about what happened in Lima? Look, I'm really sorry. I am. I shouldn't have told them. I know you wanted to keep it a secret. I get why you're mad, but they swore not to let it get out. And they were all just so worried about you, and quite frankly, so am I. And I'd rather have the rest of them looking out for you in at least that direction
Blaine!
Kurt forced himself to remain absolutely calm, even when his hair was about to stand on end. He grabbed Blaine's hands tightly and gave him a very painful smile and a forced laugh.
Blaine, I want you to look very carefully around my room and then tell me why you think I'm not talking to you.
Blaine stared, trying not to marvel at Kurt's soft hands, and then looked around the room. There were papers everywhere. A fresh printout was coming out of the printer on his desk. The laptop was still on, and it clearly displayed a half-finished term paper. Calculus notes covered the coffee table, and a huge world map was hanging over the edge of his bed. No less than 4 books were open on the coffee table. Kurt's lap was loaded with a heavy book and then his notebook. And nearly all of the mercifully fewer coffee cups that had raided the room that morning were now standing empty. Blaine turned back to Kurt, who was still giving him a pained smile.
Did it give you a hint yet?
Kurt asked in a way one would say to a 5-year-old. Blaine nodded, pursing his lips together, finally understanding and feeling rather ridiculous.
Oh, right.
Good. To be honest, I should be mad at you, and I very much want to be mad at you. And because of pure distraction and interference, I should also be mad at the entire house for making all this catching up on academics even more difficult. But I cannot. As long as you really did mean well for it, and don't intend on telling the world, I'm just too busy to actually have any emotion other than contempt for whoever designed this devastating curriculum.
I can help you if you want. Get most of this out of the way before Warbler's meeting.
Don't smile at me like that. You're not winning me over that easily either.
Blaine just smiled even more. Without warning, he gave Kurt a tight hug that lasted several seconds in silence. He leaned down to his ear for a moment.
I have to go do something for Harvey, but I'll tell Reed to come help you and I'll catch up. Don't stress too much.
Blaine smiled as he released him, rose, and left the room, leaving Kurt staring wide-eyed at his wake. He sat, aghast, hands rumpling his notes.
What kind of a hug was that? Friendly? Something else? And why?
After a pause, he shook himself out of it, groaning as he sank his head into his hands. Blaine's behavior, and just generally Blaine himself, had to be one of the things that distracted him the most in that house. He felt fortunate that he didn't have to room with him, or his grade point average would have plunged to hell.
Concentrate, Kurt. Concentrate. He's your friend. He says so. You say so. Just because he has the ability to unleash an Eden of butterflies in your gut by hugging you doesn't mean he should be distracting you.
The most chilling, high-pitched rendition of the Joker's laughter suddenly echoed throughout the house, causing Kurt to break out of his thoughts and, possibly, sending Dwight diving for the safety of his salt ring in terror. Snarling, Kurt threw down his schoolwork and got up, stomping to the door and opening it just in time to see the twins screeching loudly down the hall with that chilling laughter in highly detailed Joker costumes. One was animated, one was the Dark Knight version. Wes and David were chasing after them as Batman and Nightwing, respectively, pitching cranberry juice-loaded balloons with the respective insignias scrawled on them. Kurt didn't even want to ask what was going on. Raising his voice to an angle calculated for distance, he yelled,
If you guys don't pipe down for at least the next 2 hours, so help me, I'm going to give all the cookies to Stewart House.
Instant silence. With a satisfied smile, Kurt slammed his door shut and returned to his schoolwork.
I'm Kurt, and this is Dalton Academy. I've been boarding in Windsor House with Blaine, Wes, and David, and it's been anything but uneventful. Recently, we had a party that nearly got us suspended, and I also discovered that Windsor has some serious problems with Stewart, one of the other houses. Especially Logan, who keeps sending me all these signals. I know almost nothing about him other than that he's really handsome, talented, and interested in me. My problem? Blaine is also all those things. Except that last part.
Everyone ended up in Kurt's room trying to help him get through his catch-up work. It was both welcome and unwelcome.
You're getting it all wrong. You're not going to get the derivative that way. Give me that.
David snapped at Wes, who was trying to make out the theorem to be applied to one of the problems in Kurt's book. Both of them were still wearing pieces of their costumes. He grabbed it and scrawled something in. Reed glanced over his shoulder from where he was helping Kurt with his arts assignment. He frowned at David.
Well, that's not right either. It's the wrong formula altogether. It's that one.
He pointed to a mind-blowingly complex formula on the other page. The twins, who were looking at the massive coverage of literature term paper that Kurt was expected to complete, looked at each other and slammed the book shut at the same time.
We give up. Who's your professor here?
Murdoch is.
There was a hiss of pain from the whole room.
Why would Murdoch give him all this?
David looked at the nearly inch-thick section of the book that Kurt was expected to look into.
He would hang a Windsor boy onto the rafters by the tie and belt him if he could.
Why would he do that?
He's got a bias for Stewart since he's the house head. He's always had this chip on his shoulder for us since we accidentally set fire to the chemistry lab. It was a complete accident that time. We were almost absolutely sure that we had nothing to do with it.
The twins smiled that discomforting Cheshire smile again.
We may have measured out too much potassium nitrite for the assignment.
Well, whatever he's got for you guys, he's giving it to me now. I guess I'll just have to show him I'm not intimidated.
Kurt just rolled his eyes and turned back to his art assignment. He turned his canvas to Reed.
What do you think?
Reed grinned, observing the manner by which Kurt had watercolored the people in his assignment. They looked like design samples.
You are going to be a great fashion designer one day if that whole Broadway diva thing doesn't work out for you.
Coming from you, that's quite a compliment.
No, seriously, Murdoch can be intimidating. He's like a freaking male Agatha Trunchbull. I heard he once threw a boy out of the second-floor window and into Temer Lane's hydrangea bushes.
He didn't do anything of the sort. At best, he threatened to, and the said boy had been disrupting his class unnecessarily by getting overly freaked out because they were being told to perform Macbeth.
Who was this boy?
Dwight.
I knew it.
See? Proves Murdoch's anti-Windsor campaign. Right there.
All of us cause anti-Windsor campaigns. We haven't exactly had an excellent track record when it comes to behavior. Well, at least I still have some of mine. The rest of you, however...
He glanced at them briefly before carefully wrapping his art assignment.
Don't worry, we'll fix that. Give us a few more days.
The twins cracked evil grins at Kurt, who cringed away from them. Kurt pushed away from them on the couch and went to sit next to Reed as though looking to stay with someone safer.
Yeah, he won't be good for you either. Did Reed ever tell you about the incident with the cuckoo clock?
Wes?
Or the time in the cafeteria with the dioramas.
Or that he hit himself in the nether regions with a cricket bat.
Everyone in the room winced and hissed at that memory, and Kurt gave Reed a disbelieving look. Reed looked terribly scarlet, huffily prodding his own art assignment with a brush.
Well, I can't help it if I'm just rather clumsy.
We know that. Besides, you kind of make up for that by being so incredibly generous to me and being such a martyr to these guys.
Kurt grinned at him and gave him a kind nudge, and he nodded to the others. He threw a notebook at Wes's extended legs, resting on the tabletop.
Feet off my coffee table, please.
Ugh, I swear, you're like Blaine when he's being such a priss.
Where is he, anyway? He said he'd be back to help me.
Well, he told me to come up here and help you for a bit, but he didn't tell me when he'd be back. He said he had to see Harvey.
Probably about sectionals. Don't you worry, little Alice. Your white rabbit will be back soon.
Ethan gave Kurt's head a gentle pat. Kurt swatted his hand away from his immaculate hair.
White rabbit? What?
Isn't he? When our white rabbit appeared to you and showed you a glimpse of Wonderland, you followed and fell all the way down here with the rest of us.
Kurt rolled his eyes as the rest of them laughed, the others being used to whatever went into the twins' minds. He glanced to the clock and wondered if Blaine would be back soon. The White Rabbit was late for that important date for good reasons, which the rest of the Merry Windsor crew found out later that afternoon in the dining hall during lunch. The hall was quieter since it was a weekend and everyone had gone home, but it was stocked with warblers and the few scatterings of boys who chose not to go home that weekend for whatever reason. David looked as though he wanted to just tear off his tie and toss it. Wes looked like he wanted to flip the table. The twins, sitting across them, were glaring malevolently at the gang of Stuarts on the other side of the cafeteria. And Kurt decided that he didn't ever want to be on the receiving end of those twin ice blue glares. He looked at Blaine and stated the only thing he understood.
What do you mean, duel?
Round 2 with Logan, that's what.
What does that have to do with warblers?
Every performance, a singer who wants to take one of the spots for a solo or lead singer will have to prepare a piece to perform in front of the rest of the group. It will be assessed by Harvey and Metal on whether it's acceptable or not. When there's more than one applicant for the lead, they will each perform first in private in front of the professors. They choose the two best, then the two will duel performances, one after the other, in the hall. Then the rest of the warblers will have to vote.
Well, if it comes down to a vote, you would win, won't you? Since they like you.
It's not that easy. For one thing, I've been singing lead for quite a few performances now. No matter how much the other warblers like me, some of them might want to see someone else sing.
Evan rolled his eyes. Ethan nodded sagely.
Ditto. If they wanted to replace you, someone would have dueled with you before this.
Secondly, choosing the lead in warblers isn't about popularity. They all really will select whoever had the most vocally superior performance. And to be quite frank, Logan is really good. Even Wes and David have voted to make him lead back then during Duels.
The two glared at him, as though never wishing to ever speak of such travesties outside Warbler's Hall.
Then why has he never competed with you for solo?
Blaine shifted in his seat, leaning back with a sigh.
Because before I got my set of leads, Logan had the lead for 8 straight performances. Then, I guess he got bored and stopped asking for them.
The immensity of his ego is equidistant to the dimensions of Jupiter.
David grumbled, once again wiping down his side of the table. He cleaned when he was anxious.
It didn't matter to him that he was our strongest vocal in competition. If he didn't feel like it, he wouldn't do a damn thing.
Wes and David told me to try to duel the other boys for the lead after that. I beat them, and Harvey was surprised to find me sufficient. And since then, I've been singing lead.
Kurt looked over to the table at the other side of the hall, where Logan sat holding court with other Stuart boys. Logan glanced at him for a moment, threw him a small, barely noticeable smile, and resumed talking with other boys. Kurt turned back to the others.
I had no idea he was like that.
You can ask the other warblers. Logan really did just suddenly stop going for lead. And you know when we found out that he just felt like not going? Sectionals. Last year. Left us hanging. We couldn't compete. No lead soloist could replace him at the last minute because the last second soloist...
Wes?
Blaine's tone had a warning to it. Kurt blinked, looking from him to Wes, not understanding. Wes's eyes flickered to him for a moment. Then he just seemed to shrug and shake his head.
Whatever. Anyway, no one could replace him at the last minute. End of sectionals, end of going to the nationals. Harvey was furious. I thought he was going to expel Logan out the warblers.
But he didn't. He's still a warbler.
Yes, he is. Because we needed his pipes, maybe. I don't know. But he hasn't asked for a solo ever since. He didn't say anything either, so we just stopped talking about it. Because we might throttle him if we brought it up again.
He's got quite a pair of balls to suddenly duel Blaine for one now at sectionals. Especially since after he ditched, it was Blaine who saved our asses for the very next performance, the Fall Festival. He took over in days what was supposed to be Logan's part, and since then, our dear White Rabbit has just led the charge.
Blaine squinted at him in a "why are you calling me that again" type expression. He looked at Kurt.
Well, anyway, that's the history of it. Now Logan's challenged me to duel. I've been preparing for my performance with these guys, but I didn't know he was going to duel. I only found out this morning when Harvey called for us both in the hall. It was just him and me going in for the lead, so we both duel in front of the others this afternoon.
Kurt considered all of this and leaned back, crossing his legs elegantly, with a sigh.
I guess it's not all sunshine and rainbows in Warblerland, is it? I didn't know you guys were so competitive.
We can be, on certain things.
He glanced over at Kurt with his eyes lingering over him more than he had thought he would allow himself to. There was a crash at the food area. Reed tripped over his own feet, it would appear, and was on the ground with a whole lot of food on his clothes and on the floor, hugging his knee, which must have gotten hurt. Kurt quickly got up and ran to help him. As soon as Kurt left, Wes leaned forward, eyes flashing.
Tell me that colossal ass hat isn't doing this because he thinks it'll get Kurt's attention. Tell me that. Blaine, I'm begging you. Please, I'll have to kill him otherwise.
We all knew you were going to be lead. We've been practicing Hey Soul Sister like crazy all this time, and we have it down perfect when you sing the lead. And then a mere 2 days before performance day, Logan challenges? He can't be that crazy.
I don't know what's going on in his head. I don't know if it's about Kurt. It wouldn't make sense to make himself the enemy.
But he glanced at Kurt, helping wipe Reed's clothes down. Oddly enough, the twins glanced at each other at this, a knowing look that meant volumes of information, but they remained quiet. Blaine was oblivious.
But you know the rules. Lead isn't placed down in stone until the day before the performance.
Screw the rules! We're talking about our first sectionals in 2 years!
Wes, shush. Let's just kick his ass later today, alright?
David hissed as Kurt and Reed approached. David looked at Blaine.
Yeah, we've got your back.
When Reed and Kurt sat down, Reed looked distressed, but not about his fairly common injury.
Blaine, I heard from one of the other warblers that you're dueling with Logan. You ready?
As I'll ever be.
Blaine nodded, folding his hands on the table. He glanced at Kurt, who just smiled at him.
Then go get him.
All right, everyone.
Sylvia spoke the moment all the warblers had sat back down onto their places among the couches when they finished the normal rehearsal. Everything had gone flawlessly. Reed didn't fall off the ledge a single time, which now only left the battle for the lead. They had practiced this routine so many times that everyone knew what the lead was supposed to do, or sound like. But there were a few who could stand in the light among their unit. Sylvia looked at everyone. She knew they knew what was coming up, because they were not talking excitedly about sectionals or other things. She herself knew that this was quite the critical battle between two of the Warblers' best, who also happened to be the two most high profile. She smiled a little.
Now, we have 2 candidates to duel for the lead. As is our rules, they will each perform a song before you, after which we would take an anonymous vote. Mr. Harvey and I will count the votes and announce who takes the lead.
The 2 teachers never reveal how many votes each got, mainly so there would not be any conflicts between the Warblers about who the group seemed to favor more. But the teachers were held in such high regard that there was no Warbler who believed they would ever rig a vote to choose someone who they wanted instead.
Our 2 duelers are Blaine.
Sylvia gestured to Blaine, who stood amidst clapping.
And Logan.
Logan rose and was also received with the same amount of applause. Sylvia pushed up her glasses and held out a velvet bag to Blaine and Logan, who came forward. The 2 each drew a marble out of the bag. Logan's was red. He would go first. Blaine nodded to Sylvia and Logan and returned to his seat with Kurt, Wes, and David.
Let's see what he's got after all this time.
Kurt said nothing. In spite of himself, he was worried. He had sung with Logan before that time in the hall, and there was no indication that Logan's talent had diminished in spite of his inactivity as a soloist. Blaine sat next to Kurt with no decipherable expression, watching Logan carefully as he approached the piano. As was allowed, Logan had 3 other boys for backup with him, 2 Stuart boys and 1 Hanover. After a moment, Logan began to play. The melody was familiar, but mellowed out by the piano. It took the other boys a moment, but Kurt, with his ear still heavily tuned in to Will Schuster's music performances, immediately recognized what was happening. Logan, in a clear tone that magnetized attention, began to sing with no urgency.
Could stay awake just to hear you breathing, watch you smile while you were sleeping, while you're far away and dreaming. I could spend my life in this sweet surrender. I could stay lost in this moment forever, where every moment spent with you is a moment I treasure.
The Warblers watched in polite silence, carefully listening. Mentally, however, the Windsor boys' reactions were varied, with only hints of the emotions on their faces.
Wow, I didn't know you could sing Aerosmith like that.
Oh crap, I can't believe he can still actually sing like that.
He's good, all right. Really good, but why Aerosmith? Was Armageddon on cable yesterday?
He's not singing that to Kurt, is he?
He's not singing that to me, is he?
Oh man, if he's singing that to Kurt, those are some truly creepy lyrics.
I don't wanna close my eyes, I don't wanna fall asleep, 'cause I'd miss you, babe, and I don't wanna miss a thing, 'cause even when I dream of you, the sweetest dream would never do. I'd still miss you, babe, and I don't wanna miss a thing.
Everyone seemed to be having no problems with this. Quite a few Warblers looked at each other with small, rather impressed smiles, nodding slightly. Logan glanced briefly to them with a small smile. Blaine sank his head into his hand for a moment. cogitating about this whole performance. The Warblers were all about turning a song into something else with their vocals, and Logan fit the bill entirely by changing the rock song into something tamer and more ballad-like. The smallest sigh of contemplation left his lips for an instant, and then he felt a warm hand close over his from under the table where they sat. Blaine froze and very slightly looked to his right. Kurt wasn't looking at him. He was steadily watching Logan without batting an eye, but it was his hand that held his. No one could see. They sat near the back, so the backs of the chairs and the other boys obscured it from sight, and Kurt was simply holding his hand, a slight encouragement. Kurt glanced to him a little and gave him a faint smile before turning back front.
I don't wanna miss one smile. I don't wanna miss one kiss.
That was it. Logan had looked directly at Kurt at that time. To all the others, it was in passing, but Kurt knew that glance when he saw it.
Feel your heart so close to mine, and just stare in this moment for all the rest of time.
Kurt lowered his eyes, heat spreading into his face. His heart was in his throat, and he wasn't sure what to do or even feel, and it was even worse now than ever. It wasn't like when Finn pointed to him during the wedding reception and had him dance with him. This was different and somehow more intimate than screaming it down the hall. When someone sings a song like this, it meant something. Something that Kurt, no matter how much he wanted it, even in Dalton, was not prepared for. Especially with when he had a certain person right next to him. Blaine squeezed his hand slightly. Kurt looked up at him. He just nodded, as though telling him just to breathe. It was going to be all right. The song was ending, and Kurt and Blaine let go of their hands at the same time. At the last chorus, the song ended. The Warblers applauded, many of them smiling at Logan. The tall boy at the piano rose and smiled slightly, looking at the whole room as though he was vindicated. His eyes located and met Kurt's. Kurt was smiling at him a little, clapping along with the rest of them. By the tint of red on his face, he knew his message had reached him. He saw Blaine standing next to him, but Blaine was just smiling with nothing behind it. There was something he had that Logan didn't.
And now we have Blaine.
Reed and Kurt nodded good luck as Blaine, the twins, Wes and David then went up to the front. There were some cheers and catcalls from the Warblers as their current lead singer now made it to the front.
Let's go for it.
To Kurt's surprise, while the other boys took positions, Blaine picked up a guitar.
He can play guitar?
Yes, guitar.
Kurt colored scarlet. Leaning forward a little in his seat, Reed looked at his friend and laughed to himself. Kurt was clearly smitten, and it would do everyone in Windsor a big favor if he and Blaine just came out with it. And then he looked up and saw Logan, not even watching Blaine. He was looking at Kurt. Reed fidgeted, uncomfortable at the sight, and hooked his elbow onto Kurt's in a show of protective camaraderie and just grinned with him as they watched. Blaine stood before them and started playing with a gentle strum. The boys looked interested as they sat forward. Blaine started to sing his own spin on a song, starting out slow in acoustic rhythm.
I should love you, but I want to. I just can't turn away. I shouldn't see you, but I can't move. I can't look away.
Reed's mouth dropped in amazement, stifling back a laugh. He knew that song, and from the way Blaine glanced twice at Kurt while he played, he was singing to him too. Blaine's acoustic manner took the song over, the lyrics taking strong prominence with his expressive voice. He made it his own. that song. Kurt sat listening, surprised as Blaine continued growing stronger, but never quite losing his own even way.
So you know this feeling's taking control of me, and I can't help it. I won't sit around, I can't let him win now. Thought you should know I've tried my best to let go of you, but I don't want to. I just gotta say it all before I go, just so you know.
In a noted strum, the other boys accompanied him in the chorus. The Warblers were grinning. They had heard Blaine strum the guitar before, mainly while they were practicing, but he had never quite performed like this. It didn't sound like the old song. Blaine's acoustic performed it in his style, just like he did to Teenage Dream. Logan was leaning back on his chair and watching with immense interest, almost proud, the way a combatant would when finding a worthy opponent. Blaine sang with no inhibitions, letting the music do its own work, and his voice express everything he wanted to pour out into words. Kurt sat shell-shocked, scarlet all over his face. If he hadn't already been so sure before, he was now positive the song couldn't be meant for him. Or was it? That was just it with Blaine, wasn't it? He never knew.
Emptiness is killing me, and I'm wondering why I've waited so long.
But even as he listened, leaning forward, hearing the words, he wished really, really hard that it was for him. Blaine's warm eyes met his for a fraction of a moment. It made Kurt smile.
I can't believe it. I think I just fell for him.
Just so you know, this feeling's taking control of me, and I can't help it. I won't sit around, I can't let him win now. Thought you should know I've tried my best to let go of you, but I don't want to. I just gotta say it all before I go. Just so you know.
It was the most unusual feeling in the world, Kurt realized. Everything and nothing made sense for a minute, going everywhere, and then suddenly, gone. One blown-out match. He looked down at his hands, feeling as though on the inside, everything had gone dead quiet. After all this time, he finally realized that he had truly fallen for someone. When he admitted it to himself, the locks flew open and let out all the other awkward, unsure emotions out, leaving that admission inside. He finally had that room to breathe. In that small moment, he let out his breath. He looked up at Blaine, who had finished his song. The Warblers burst into applause, smiling at him. Kurt also smiled, clapping. But he couldn't look Blaine in the eye anymore. He kept his eyes down, afraid that the realization was so fresh that Blaine would see with just one look.
Kurt, are you okay? Were you that moved?
Kurt glanced at his friend and smiled. He didn't know what would happen later, or tomorrow, but right now at least, he knew one absolutely true thing, and that was all that mattered.
I think so.
Sylvia and Greg stood in front of the group assembled.
We have tallied your votes.
The Warbler stood with bated breath. Sylvia looked at Greg with a nod.
Both of them did well, but we only need one lead for this performance, and there are no solos.
They nodded, understanding. Sylvia smiled quietly.
For this performance, our lead singer is Blaine.
Yes, right. I knew you could beat him. Period.
The Windsor boys leapt into the air as the Warblers cheered. Logan also applauded, nodding with a smile. He accepted this defeat. He glanced at Kurt, clapping so hard that he was becoming breathless. Logan knew what that look was. He himself had that look before. But he also knew that he had a pocket of time. While the other boys swarmed at Blaine, Kurt remained at a safe distance, as though afraid to breach a circle. Logan smiled.
Lost this one then, Blaine, but I still have time. I'll just have to catch up.
That was close! Man, I can't believe it was that close.
He gave Blaine a heavy pat on the back, nearly making the other boy buckle as they headed back to the house. Everything was dark out now, nothing but the leafless trees printed against a navy sky empty of stars. It was turning colder these days.
Yeah, man, he put his own spin on an Aerosmith song, and he was good. Even I started to get worried. Damn close.
I bet you guys had a 1-point difference.
The twins cracked grins and looked at Kurt immediately.
Who did you vote for, Alice?
Kurt turned deep red, cold hands in his pockets.
You know I voted for Blaine. Why do you have to ask me that?
So you liked it?
Yeah.
Kurt smiled briefly at him. Blaine noticed how Kurt was avoiding his eyes and felt confused.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. Really. Just tired, I think. I had no idea falling for someone was so tiring. How do Quinn and the rest of them do it?
Are you sure? Because you're not really looking at me.
Kurt let out a shivering breath. Courage. He looked at Blaine and smiled. Longer now.
How about this? Better?
Blaine smiled a little. Something still seemed off, but for now, it looks as though it was still okay. Kurt was flushed, with a cold wind whipping his face. Blaine thought he looked beautiful. Hanging from the upper balcony, Dwight was screaming at them as they approached the house.
What took you? Who won?
We did!
Wes and David yelled, grinning at him. The twins pumped their fists into the air.
Blaine did great!
Dwight looked at his crystal ball in his hand in disgust.
Man, this thing sucks. It told me we'd lose.
Greg headed to the teacher's quarters. Sylvia looked amused.
That was interesting.
You think so? Doesn't it say something about how the group feels about Logan? The votes say it all. Blaine won by a landslide. Speaking as a teacher, he had tied with Logan in skill, but the win by vote was a tremendous margin.
I doubt it's about last year. Maybe they just really do want Blaine for lead singer. Song was an odd choice for Logan, though. It's not his general style.
I know. The last time he made drastic changes, we had quite a few problems. I start to question my own decision to retain him. It was simply that he had so much promise. And don't think I don't hear the news. That savage fencing final with Blaine. I don't want it to be another fiasco like last year.
Relax, Greg. The boys will work it out just like they did last year. They have their own choices to make, and they've made the right ones so far.
Sylvia, the mother hen, smiled.
Including Logan? Sylvia, I'm not prepared to lose another singer like that. And Kurt, our first countertenor in 20 years, is at the front running for second soloist. If anything else comes up, we might not have that advantage anymore.
When do we make that official, by the way?
He'll have to duel for it. If he wants a lead position, he'll have to fight for it like Blaine did.
From the looks of him, and as a Windsor, I'm sure he will.
On the next episode, Sectionals.